The monkey should have been dead. Dr. James Carter held the camera with trembling hands as he watched the impossible scene before his eyes. For 20 years he had studied lions in the savannas of the Serengeti, and never, absolutely never, had he witnessed anything like this. His heart was pounding so hard it felt as if it were about to burst out of his chest. Only 15 meters away, an adult male lion named Cato remained completely motionless. His golden eyes were fixed on something moving among the acacia trees. Something that should have been just another meal. But it wasn't. It was Juma, a gray-furred baboon who, for some inexplicable reason, was not running to save his own life. On the contrary, Juma stood still on top of a rock, staring directly at the predator that could kill him with a single swipe. James felt a chill run down his spine. It made no sense at all. Baboons flee from lions. They always flee. It is pure instinct, engraved over millions of years of evolution. Predator and prey. Hunter and hunted. The rules of nature do not lie. But there, in that moment, the rules seemed to have been torn apart. The hot savanna wind carried the smell of dry grass and red earth. James adjusted the camera's zoom, trying to capture every detail of that behavioral anomaly. His assistant, a young local guide named Benjamin, was crouched beside him, mouth agape. "This isn't normal, doctor," Benjamin whispered, his voice trembling. "Lions don't leave baboons alive. Never." James knew that better than anyone. He had seen Cato take down zebras, wildebeest, even buffalo when hunting in a group. That dark-maned lion with scars across his muzzle was a born predator. Efficient. Lethal. Without hesitation. But now he was only watching. And in Cato's gaze there was something James never expected to identify in a wild animal. Recognition. The researcher's mind went back 3 weeks. 3 weeks that now made perfect sense, but at the time had seemed like just another tragic event of wildlife. It all began with a scream. James was documenting the hunting behavior of a pride of lions when he heard the desperate sound echoing through the valley. It was the kind of scream that freezes the blood. Sharp. Urgent. Full of panic. He ran toward the sound, the camera bouncing against his neck, and when he reached the banks of the Mara River, he saw a scene that left him paralyzed. A lion cub was being dragged away by the current. The little one was only a few months old. Golden fur smeared with mud, eyes wide with terror, tiny paws desperately trying to find something solid. But the water was too strong. Too fast. Merciless. On the riverbank, Cato roared with an intensity that made the air vibrate. The lion ran back and forth, trying to find a way to reach his son, but the river was swollen from recent rains. The current was deadly even for a predator of his size. James felt his heart tighten. There was nothing he could do. Nature was following its cruel course. That was when he saw the movement. A brown blur leaping from branch to branch in the trees lining the river. Fast. Determined. It was Juma. The baboon James had observed over the past few months, always walking alone, always keeping his distance from the rest of the troop. What happened next defied all logic. Juma jumped into the water. Benjamin shouted something in Swahili that James didn't fully understand, but the tone was one of total disbelief. Baboons do not jump into flooded rivers. Baboons do not risk their lives. And baboons most definitely do not save lion cubs. But Juma did exactly that. The monkey swam against the current with a strength that seemed impossible for his size. His long arms sliced through the water with desperate movements. When he finally reached the cub, he grabbed it by the scruff of the neck, the same way lionesses carry their babies. James could not believe what he was filming. His hands shook so badly that the image went out of focus for a few seconds. He forced himself to breathe and stabilized the camera. Juma fought against the water. Every second felt like an eternity. The river tried to tear them away, to pull them under, but the baboon did not let go. His hind feet found a submerged rock. Then another. And then, with superhuman effort, he emerged onto the bank. The cub coughed up water and collapsed in the grass. Alive. Cato was only 10 meters away. James held his breath. That was the moment. The moment when nature would return to normal. The lion would attack. The monkey would die. Order would be restored. But Cato did not attack. The great feline slowly approached the cub, sniffed it all over, and then did something James could never have imagined possible. He looked at Juma. Truly looked. Not with hunger. Not with predatory instinct. With something different. Juma remained frozen for a moment that seemed to stretch on for hours. Then slowly, as if he understood that his presence was no longer a death sentence, he retreated toward the trees. But he did not run. He walked. Slowly. As if he knew he would be safe. And he was. From that day on, James noticed subtle changes in the behavior of both. Cato began hunting in a specific area, avoiding the territory where Juma and his small group fed. Juma, in turn, began to emit a specific call whenever he saw something that could threaten the cub. It was an alliance. Unlikely. Impossible. But real. Now, 3 weeks later, James was witnessing definitive proof. The dry season had arrived in full force. The savanna was brown and parched. Prey animals were scarce. Cato probably hadn't eaten in days. And there was Juma. Alone. Vulnerable. An easy meal. But the lion did not move. James saw something glimmer in Cato's eyes. An internal struggle. Hunger versus memory. Instinct versus choice. The lion's body was tense, muscles contracted, ready for the leap that never came. Then Juma did something extraordinary. The baboon climbed down from the rock, walked to a nearby tree, plucked some fruit, and placed it on the ground. Not for himself. For Cato. Benjamin let out a strangled sound of surprise. James felt hot tears in his eyes without fully understanding why. Cato approached the fruit. Sniffed it. He did not eat, of course. Lions are carnivores. But he stood there, motionless, staring at that impossible offering. And then, for the first time in 20 years of his career, James Carter saw a lion turn his back on an easy prey and simply walk away. Juma remained in the clearing until Cato disappeared among the acacias. Only then did he return to the trees. James turned off the camera, his hands still trembling. That would change everything. Everything he thought he knew about animal behavior, about instinct, about the very nature of consciousness. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. And in the comments, tell us what you thought and which city or country you're watching from. Because what you're going to discover in the next chapters will impress you even more. Because the Rael story was only just beginning. And what James still didn't know was that this bond between predator and prey would have consequences far beyond what anyone could imagine. The savanna held more secrets. Secrets that would be revealed in the days to come. Secrets that would test the limits of that impossible friendship in ways no one could foresee. In the days that followed, James discovered that witnessing the impossible came at a price. His reputation. When he sent the video to the university, he expected enthusiasm. Perhaps even recognition for recording a behavior never before documented. What he received was skepticism. Doubt. And something worse than that. Discredit. James, we need to talk about these images. Dr. Rachel Morrison's voice sounded tired over the satellite phone. She was the head of the zoology department, a woman he had respected for more than a decade. The academic community is questioning the authenticity of the material. He felt his blood boil. Questioning? Rachel, you know me. I would never manipulate data. I'm not saying you did it intentionally, she continued, choosing each word carefully. But it's possible that you misinterpreted what you saw. Maybe the lion was already satiated. Maybe the monkey was just passing by and... He saved the cub from drowning, James interrupted, his voice louder than he intended. I filmed everything. You saw the video. I did. And that's exactly why we're skeptical. James, this violates everything we know about predatory behavior. Lions do not develop gratitude. They don't have emotional memory of that kind. They are driven by instinct, hunger, territory. Not by abstract feelings. He hung up the phone before he said something he would regret. Benjamin watched everything from the entrance of the tent, with a worried expression. They don't believe you? No, James replied, running his hands through his graying hair. And you know the worst part? I don't blame them. If someone had told me this story 3 weeks ago, I would have doubted it too. But doubting didn't change what he had seen. It didn't change what was happening at that very moment on the savanna. James decided to do the only thing a real scientist would do. Document everything. Every interaction. Every anomalous behavior. Turn the impossible into irrefutable evidence. Over the next 2 weeks, he and Benjamin practically lived on the savannah. They woke before dawn, followed Cato and Juma, recorded every movement. And the more they observed, the more extraordinary everything became. Cato was not just avoiding hunting Juma. He was actively protecting the monkey's territory. James saw this for the first time on a sweltering afternoon. A young leopard, probably recently expelled from its native territory, had detected the scent of baboons. The spotted feline crept toward the area where Juma was feeding with 2 other members of his former troop. Out of nowhere, Cato appeared. The roar was so intense that James felt the vibration in his chest, even from 40 meters away. The leopard froze, then quickly retreated, disappearing among the rocks. Cato remained there for almost an hour, like a sentinel, until he was certain the threat had passed. Juma watched from a tree, and James could swear he saw something like understanding in the baboon's eyes. But the story had another side. A darker side. Not everyone on the savannah viewed that alliance favorably. In fact, no one did. Cato's pride was the first to show hostility. James documented the moment when 3 lionesses from the group approached the male with aggressive postures. One of them, whom he called Nasira, even growled directly at Cato. The message was clear. That behavior was unacceptable. It was violating the ancestral rules of the pride. Cato roared back, asserting his position as the dominant male. The lionesses retreated, but James noticed something disturbing in their eyes. It wasn't fear. It was rejection. In the following weeks, Cato began hunting alone more frequently. The lionesses avoided sharing hunting territory with him. When they brought down prey, they moved away if Cato tried to approach. He was being isolated, treated like an outsider, as if he no longer belonged to that world. James felt his heart tighten as he documented it. He had known Cato for years. He had watched that lion grow, fight for his territory, form his own pride. And now, because of a choice that defied nature, he was losing everything. But Juma's situation was even worse. Baboons are extremely social animals. They live in hierarchical troops where every member has a role. Isolation means death. It means total vulnerability. James watched as Juma's troop expelled him definitively. It was violent. Brutal. 3 dominant males surrounded Juma, struck him with their fists, bit his shoulders. The message was the same the lionesses had given Cato. You broke the rules. You are no longer one of us. Juma tried to resist, but it was one against many. When he finally managed to escape, he was bleeding. James saw the monkey climb into an isolated tree and stay there, alone, staring at the troop that had rejected him. And for the first time, James understood the true weight of that impossible friendship. Both had become outcasts, rejected by their own species. All because they chose something different from what millions of years of evolution had programmed into them. Benjamin voiced exactly what James was thinking. They paid too high a price, Doctor. Because of gratitude. No, James corrected, still watching Juma through the lens. They paid the price for being conscious. For choosing something beyond instinct. But nature does not forgive such choices easily. The dry season intensified. The sun scorched the savannah mercilessly. Waterholes dried up. Prey animals migrated to greener regions. Hunger became a constant presence. James watched Cato waste away. The lion's ribs began to show beneath his fur. His movements grew slower. Hunger was exacting its toll. And worse. Cato was alone. Without the pride to hunt in a group, his chances of bringing down large prey were almost non-existent. Solitary lions rarely survive for long. One afternoon, James witnessed something that made him question everything. Cato was lying in the shade of an acacia, clearly debilitated. His breathing was heavy. His eyes, once so vivid and golden, now seemed dull. That was when Juma appeared. The baboon climbed down slowly from the tree, carrying something. James adjusted the zoom and saw it. Fruits. Many fruits. More than Juma could eat on his own. The monkey placed the food a few meters from Cato and backed away. Benjamin whispered beside James. He's trying to feed a lion with fruit. The scene was absurd. Desperate. Beautiful and tragic at the same time. Cato lifted his head, looked at the fruit, then at Juma. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the lion dragged himself toward the food. He didn't eat, of course. His digestive system couldn't process vegetables. But he stayed there, lying beside that impossible offering. And James understood. It wasn't about the food. It was about the intention. About the gesture. It was about a monkey desperately trying to save the life of the predator who chose not to kill him. But reality was cruel. Fruit would not sustain Cato. And without food, without the pride, the lion would not last much longer. James turned off the camera that night with a heavy weight in his chest. For the first time in his career, he wanted to interfere. He wanted to help. He wanted to break the sacred rule of scientific observation. Benjamin noticed. "You're thinking about doing something." "I can't," James replied, but his voice lacked conviction. "It would be unethical. It would be manipulating nature." "Nature is already being manipulated, Doctor. By them themselves. By their own choices." Those words echoed in James's mind all night long. As he tried to sleep in the hot, stifling tent, he couldn't stop thinking about Cato and Juma. Two beings who defied their own essences. Who chose something greater than instinct. And who would now pay the final price for it. Unless something changed. Unless nature somehow found a way to accommodate that extraordinary anomaly. But James had no idea how that would be possible. He had no idea that in the coming days, he would witness something even more surprising. James woke before dawn with a decision made. He would not interfere directly. But he would also not simply watch Cato starve to death while documenting everything with scientific detachment. There was a thin line between observation and cruelty, and he had finally realized which side he wanted to be on. "Benjamin," he called, while it was still dark outside. "We need to track the movements of the wildebeest herd that passed through the northern valley yesterday." The young guide looked at him with immediate understanding. "And if we happen to document where they'll be grazing today?" "Exactly. And if Cato happens to be near that area," James left the sentence hanging. It wasn't feeding the lion. It was just providing information. Cato would still have to hunt alone, still have to use his own skills. But at least he would have a chance. They left before sunrise, following the fresh tracks left by the wildebeest. The herd had moved to an area with denser vegetation near an almost dry stream. James carefully marked the coordinates. Then came the hardest part. Finding Cato without making it seem intentional. Letting the lion discover that information on his own. James knew the feline's movement patterns. He knew where Cato usually rested during the day. It was Juma who solved the problem in a way James could never have imagined. The baboon appeared at the camp at midday. Simply appeared, as if he knew exactly where the humans were. Benjamin nearly dropped the water he was drinking. "Doctor, the monkey is here." James stepped out of the tent and came face to face with Juma. The animal watched him with a disturbing intensity. There was no fear in those eyes. There was something different. Urgency. Juma made a specific sound. A call James had documented before. It was the same sound the baboon made whenever he wanted to alert Cato about something important. "He knows," Benjamin whispered, his voice filled with awe. "He knows you want to help." James felt a chill run down his spine. That was impossible. Animals didn't have that level of understanding about human intentions. But there was Juma, waiting. As if he understood perfectly what James intended to do. The researcher made a split-second decision. He got into his jeep, started the engine, and began driving slowly toward Cato's territory. Juma followed through the trees, leaping from branch to branch with impressive agility. When they got close to the area where Cato rested, James stopped the vehicle. Juma climbed down from the trees and ran toward the lion. James and Benjamin watched from a distance, barely able to believe what was happening. The baboon approached Cato and made that call again. The lion lifted his head, clearly weak, but alert. Then Juma did something extraordinary. He pointed with his arm toward the northern valley. He pointed repeatedly, making urgent sounds. "He's indicating where the wildebeest are," Benjamin said, his voice trembling with emotion. Cato watched Juma for a long moment. Then, with visible effort, he stood up. The lion moved in the direction the monkey had indicated, walking slowly but with purpose. James followed everything through the lens, tears blurring his vision. That wasn't just cooperation. It was intentional communication. It was joint strategy. It was something traditional science would say was impossible between such different species. In the following hours, James documented something that would change his understanding of animal intelligence forever. Cato found the wildebeest herd, studied the terrain, waited for the right moment, and attacked. The hunt was brutal and beautiful at the same time. Cato chose a young wildebeest that had strayed from the group. The lion was still weak, his movements not as precise as before, but hunger gave him a fierce determination. The attack lasted less than 3 minutes. When it ended, Cato had food. He had a chance to survive. James turned off the camera with trembling hands. He had witnessed cooperation between predator and prey at a level that challenged everything he thought he knew about behavioral biology. But the story was far from over. In the days that followed, something even more surprising began to happen. Other animals noticed the alliance between Cato and Juma, and they reacted in completely unexpected ways. A clan of hyenas, led by a female James called Scar because of a mark on her muzzle, began to circle the territory. Hyenas are opportunistic, clever, dangerous in groups, and they had noticed that Cato was isolated, vulnerable. James saw when the clan surrounded the lion on an especially hot afternoon. There were 7 hyenas against a solitary, weakened lion. Cato's chances were not good. The hyenas began to attack in turns, biting Cato's hind legs, forcing him to spin constantly. It was a tactic they used to exhaust large predators before the final attack. Cato roared, fought, but was clearly losing ground. One of the hyenas managed a deep bite into his left hind leg. Blood stained the dry earth. That was when Juma arrived. The baboon did not come alone. He brought 5 other members of a different troop. Strong males who would normally never approach a lion or hyenas. What happened next was chaotic and unbelievable. The baboons attacked the hyenas. Not to kill, they didn't have the strength for that, but to distract. They threw stones, branches, screamed, creating enough chaos to break the attack formation. Scar growled in frustration. Her companions were confused, splitting their attention between the lion and the monkeys. It made no sense. Baboons do not defend lions. Never. Cato took advantage of the distraction. With a roar that seemed to come from the depths of his soul, he charged at Scar. The hyena recoiled, surprised by the sudden burst of energy. The others followed their leader, retreating quickly. When silence returned, Cato was bleeding, panting, but alive. The baboons watched from a safe distance. Juma stood among them, looking at the lion. And then something happened that James would never forget for the rest of his life. Cato walked toward where the baboons were. The monkeys tensed, ready to flee. But the lion did not attack. He simply lay down there, a few meters from them, as if he were saying thank you in the only way he knew how. The baboons relaxed. Some even sat down. For nearly half an hour, predator and prey shared the same space in complete peace. Benjamin was openly crying beside James. "This will change everything, Doctor. Everything we know about them." James only nodded, unable to speak. His throat was too tight. That night, while organizing the day's footage, he noticed something that made him stop. In the latest recordings, it was clearly visible that the baboons who helped Juma were not members of his former troop. They were from a completely different group. That meant Juma's story had spread. That other baboons knew what he had done, and chose to help. The information had traveled across the savannah in a way James could not fully explain. But the fact was undeniable. The alliance between Cato and Juma was no longer a secret. Other animals knew. They watched. And some, apparently, chose to support that impossible friendship. James wrote in his journal that night, "Today I witnessed interspecies cooperation at a level that challenges our definitions of consciousness, empathy, and moral choice. If wild animals can choose alliance over instinct, if they can communicate intention across species barriers, then we must fundamentally rethink what it means to be conscious." But he still didn't know that the true test was yet to come. That nature was preparing a final challenge for that friendship. A challenge that would force Cato and Juma to prove, once and for all, whether the bond between them was strong enough to survive the impossible. The final test came in the form of fire. James woke up to the smell of smoke in the air. It was October, the peak of the dry season, and natural fires were not uncommon. But when he stepped out of the tent and saw the horizon tinted orange and red, His heart began to race. The fire was spreading fast. Far too fast. "Benjamin!" he shouted, already running toward the jeep. "We need to evacuate. Now." But Benjamin didn't move. He was pointing south, where the flames were advancing at a terrifying speed. "Doctor, that direction." James didn't need him to finish the sentence. That was exactly where Cato and Juma spent most of their time. The territory they had turned into their improbable refuge. The decision was instant. "We're going after them." Driving toward a wildfire violated every safety protocol. But James couldn't simply flee knowing that those two extraordinary beings were in danger. The jeep tore across the savannah at high speed. Ash fell from the sky like black snow. The air was so hot it burned the lungs. Through the thick smoke, James could see animals running in panic. Zebras, gazelles, even buffalo were galloping desperately away from the flames. That was when they saw Cato. The lion was standing on a rocky rise, roaring repeatedly. He wasn't fleeing. He was searching for something. For someone. "He's looking for the cub," Benjamin shouted over the engine noise. James felt his stomach twist. The cub. In all the chaos, he had completely forgotten the little lion Juma had saved months earlier. The cub who now, at nearly 6 months old, should have been strong enough to run on his own. But where was he? Cato came down from the rise and ran toward the flames. James floored the accelerator, following the lion even knowing it was madness. The smoke was so thick he could barely see. His eyes burned. Every breath was a struggle. Then they found him. The cub was trapped. A burning tree had fallen, blocking his escape route. The little lion was cornered against a rock formation, with fire advancing from 3 different sides. His panicked cries cut through the air like knives. Cato tried to reach him, but the heat was too intense. The flames formed an impenetrable wall. The lion retreated, roaring in frustration and despair. He tried again from another angle, and again was forced back. James stopped the jeep and grabbed the emergency fire extinguisher he carried. But before he could get out, he saw something that left him frozen. Juma emerged running through the smoke. The baboon was coming from a completely opposite direction. He must have been safe, far from the fire. But there he was, voluntarily running into hell. "No," Benjamin whispered, his voice breaking. "He's not going to." But Juma did. The monkey found a route that not even Cato had noticed. A narrow passage between rocks, temporarily protected from the fire by a sudden shift in the wind. Juma squeezed through, his movements fast and precise even amid the chaos. James filmed everything with his hands shaking violently. Tears streamed down his face, mixing with soot and sweat. He knew he might be documenting Juma's final moments alive. The baboon reached the cub. He grabbed the little lion by the scruff of the neck, the same way he had months earlier in the river. But this time it was different. The cub was bigger, heavier. And the way back was beginning to be engulfed by flames. Juma hesitated for a second. James saw in the monkey's eyes the exact moment he realized he might not make it out alive. And then Cato did something no animal should be capable of doing. The lion entered the fire. James screamed, but the sound was lost in the roar of the flames. Cato crossed the wall of fire, his fur scorching, his skin burning. The lion ignored the pain, driven by something far more powerful than survival instinct. Paternal love. Cato reached Juma and the cub. The monkey placed the little lion onto the father's back. Then he climbed up Cato's fur, positioning himself on the lion's back, still holding the cub. What happened next defied everything James knew about biology, physics, and possibility. Cato ran through the flames carrying both his son and the monkey who had saved him. The lion moved with a speed and determination that seemed superhuman. Or superanimal. Flames licked his body. The smell of burning fur filled the air. But Cato did not stop. He burst out the other side in a dramatic leap, rolling across the ground to extinguish the embers in his fur. Juma and the cub were thrown aside, but they were alive. All of them were alive. James was out of the jeep without even realizing how. He ran to them with the extinguisher, putting out the last flames still burning in Cato's fur. Benjamin was right behind him with a first aid backpack. Cato was badly injured. Burns covered his paws, his muzzle, parts of his back. The lion was breathing heavily, clearly in shock. but his eyes searched for only one thing: his son. The cub was frightened, coughing smoke, but unharmed. Juma had protected him throughout the journey through the fire. The monkey was in better condition than Cato, but he too had burns on his hands and feet. And then, as James tried to process everything he had just witnessed, something even more extraordinary happened. The baboon troop appeared. Not just the small group that had helped before, but dozens of them. They came from every direction, calling, shouting. When they saw Juma injured, they immediately surrounded him. But they did not attack him. They did not reject him. They cared for him. James watched wide-eyed, as baboons brought wet leaves and applied them to Juma's burns. Others brought water in their cheeks, sharing the precious liquid with a monkey who had been expelled. And Cato's lionesses arrived as well. Nasira came first, followed by the other females of the pride. They approached slowly, cautiously. James held his breath, expecting more rejection, more isolation. But Nasira lay down beside Cato. The other lionesses did the same, forming a protective circle around the injured male and his cub. One of them began to lick Cato's wounds gently. They had returned. The pride had accepted Cato again. Benjamin was openly crying. "Doctor, what did we just see?" James couldn't answer immediately. His throat was too tight. When he finally spoke, his voice came out as a rough whisper. "We saw evolution in real time. Not biological evolution. Moral evolution. Consciousness transcending genetic programming." The fire continued to advance, but now in a different direction, pushed by the wind. The immediate danger had passed. James used the Jeep's radio to call the park rangers, informing them about the fire and requesting veterinary support to treat the injured animals. As they waited, he observed the scene before him. Cato surrounded by his pride, being cared for by the females who had once rejected him. Juma surrounded by dozens of baboons who now treated him as a hero. And the small cub, the innocent catalyst of all that transformation, sleeping peacefully between his father's paws. Two species that should have been mortal enemies, resting just meters apart. Both exhausted. Both wounded. But both alive. And both changed forever. James turned on the camera one last time that day. He recorded everything. The footage would shake in the final video because of his unsteady hands, but he didn't care. That wasn't just scientific documentation. It was testimony. Living proof that nature had far more depth than any textbook had ever captured. That animals were capable of moral choice, of sacrifice, of transformation, of love. 3 months later, James Carter was sitting in a conference room at the University of Oxford, facing an audience of more than 200 scientists. The video had just ended. Absolute silence filled the auditorium. Then the first hand went up. Then another. And another. Within seconds, half the audience was on its feet, applauding. The other half remained seated, clearly skeptical, but unable to deny what they had just witnessed. Dr. Rachel Morrison was in the front row. Her eyes were red. She stood up and walked to the stage, hugged James without saying a word. When she finally stepped back, she whispered only, "You were right. I'm sorry for doubting you." But not everyone was convinced. A professor of animal behavior from Germany stood up, his voice heavy with skepticism. "Dr. Carter, even with these extraordinary images, how can we be sure that we are not simply projecting human emotions onto behaviors that have simpler biological explanations?" It was the question James had been expecting. The same doubt he himself had had at the beginning. "Because I spent 6 months observing every interaction," James replied, his voice steady. "Because I documented not just isolated moments, but consistent patterns of behavior that defy purely instinctive explanations. And because, in the end, I witnessed conscious choice." Cato had countless opportunities to hunt Juma. Hunger should have overridden any other consideration. But it didn't. He paused, letting the words sink in. The question is not whether we are anthropomorphizing. The question is whether our definition of consciousness has always been too limited. If we define consciousness only by human patterns, then yes, we will always be skeptical. But if we open ourselves to the possibility that consciousness can manifest in different ways in different species, then what I observed is not impossible. It is simply unexpected. The presentation ended with more questions than answers. But James knew that was how science progressed. Not through absolute certainties, but through expanded possibilities. That night, he returned to his hotel room and called Benjamin via video call. The young guide was back in the Serengeti, continuing the observations James had begun. "How are they?" James asked before any greeting. Benjamin smiled. "You won't believe it, Doctor. Cato has fully recovered. The burns have healed. And he's back to hunting with the pride. But there's more." "What?" "Juma now has constant company. The troop accepted him back completely. But more than that, other baboons have started approaching Cato without fear. Not all of them, of course. Most still keep their distance. But some seem to understand that that particular lion is different." James felt tears burn in his eyes. "And the cub?" "Growing strong. In fact, he's the most curious of all. Yesterday I saw him playing near where the baboons were feeding. Keeping his distance, but interacting. As if he were learning that the rules can be different." That was more than James could have hoped for. Not just the survival of the friendship between Cato and Juma, but the possibility that that exception could become something larger. A new form of coexistence. "Benjamin, keep documenting everything. Every interaction. Every change in behavior. This will take years to be fully understood, but it's the beginning of something important." When he hung up, James opened his laptop and began to write. Not a formal scientific paper. Not yet. That would come later, with all the necessary academic rigor. But in that moment, he wrote from the heart. He wrote about what he had truly witnessed during those extraordinary months on the savannah. About two beings who chose something beyond what biology had programmed into them. About rejection and acceptance. About sacrifice and gratitude. About the meaning of being alive and conscious in a universe that often seems cold and mechanical. "For decades," he typed, "we have operated under the premise that animals are sophisticated biological machines. That every action can be reduced to instinct, genetics, chemical reaction. And in large part, perhaps that is true. But Cato and Juma taught me that there is something more. Something that emerges when certain conditions align. A spark of conscious choice that transcends programming." He paused, thinking of the right words. "I am not saying that all animals have consciousness in the human sense. I am not saying that nature has ceased to be cruel, or that predators and prey will now live in universal harmony. Reality is more nuanced than that. But I am saying that we need to expand our understanding of what is possible. That we need to recognize that consciousness may exist on spectrums, in forms we do not yet fully understand." 6 months later, James returned to the Serengeti. This time he was not alone. A team of 10 researchers accompanied him, all eager to study that extraordinary phenomenon. But James insisted on going alone on the first morning back. He drove to the territory where it had all begun. The sun was rising, painting the savannah in gold and orange. And there, in the same clearing where he had witnessed the impossible for the first time, he found them. Cato was lying under an acacia tree, his now-grown cub at his side. A few meters away, Juma rested on a low branch, calmly eating fruit. Other baboons were scattered through the nearby trees. And the lionesses of the pride were hunting in the distance. Everything looked normal. As if predators and prey had always coexisted like that. But James knew the truth. That was not normal. It was extraordinary. It was the result of conscious choices made by beings who refused to accept the limitations of their own natures. Juma was the first to notice James. The monkey climbed down from the tree and walked toward him. Not with fear. Not with aggression. But with something that looked like curiosity. James remained still as Juma approached. The baboon stopped 1 meter away, looked deeply into the researcher's eyes, then returned to his tree. It was a brief moment. Silent. But heavy with meaning. Cato lifted his head, observed the interaction, then went back to resting. As if to say, "You are accepted here. You witnessed. You understood." James spent that day observing. Not filming. Not documenting scientifically. Just observing as a human being privileged enough to witness something rare and precious. At the end of the afternoon, as he began driving back to camp, he thought about the question many people had asked since his story had become public. What does this mean for us? For humanity? The answer, James realized, was both simple and profound. If a lion and a monkey can choose friendship over instinct, if they can challenge millions of years of evolutionary programming because of gratitude and memory, then what excuse do we humans have for not doing the same? How many times do we choose hatred when we could choose understanding? How many times do we allow superficial differences to divide us when we share so much in common? How many times do we act on instinct when we could act on consciousness? Cato and Juma did not solve all the mysteries of animal consciousness. They did not transform the savannah into a paradise where everyone lives in harmony. Nature was still harsh. Survival still demanded sacrifice. But they proved something fundamental. They proved that choice exists. That gratitude can overcome hunger. That emotional memory can rewrite instinct. And that sometimes, against all odds, compassion wins. James parked the Jeep and looked up at the African sky beginning to darken. Stars appeared one by one, reminding him how vast and mysterious the universe truly was. And somewhere in that vastness, a lion and a monkey had found a way to be something more than what their natures originally dictated. That, James thought, was hope. Pure and simple. If you followed this story to the end, don't forget to leave your like on the video and subscribe to the channel. And in the comments, tell us, what did you think of this incredible story? Which city or country are you watching from? Your opinion is very important to us. Because stories like this remind us that the world still has the capacity to surprise us. That life is richer and more complex than any theory can fully capture. And that sometimes, the impossible is just the improbable waiting for the right circumstance. The friendship between Cato and Juma continues to this day. Benjamin still monitors them, documenting every development. And who knows how many other extraordinary stories are happening at this very moment, in forests, savannas, and oceans around the world, waiting for someone with eyes attentive enough to witness them. Nature, after all, still holds secrets. And some of them may change everything we thought we knew about being alive.